Good morning, everyone who's joining. My name's Kate from Kate Bishop Coaching. So thanks so much for joining today. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. We'll just give a bit of time for people to log in. So sit tight, relax, and we'll be chatting in just a moment.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's panel discussion. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in this morning. This morning, we'll be looking at redundancies, but not only looking at the process that an employer must follow, but also how do we help an employee who has been made redundant. I think when we look at redundancies, we err on the side of just making sure the process is fair, but we don't look at in terms of what impact does it have on person and how can we assist the person through this process. I'm Rihana Jaino and I'm an HR consultant from Constantia Consulting. This morning on the panel, I have with me Kate Bishop, who's a performance and career coach from Kate Bishop Coaching, and as well Stephen Eckert, who is an employment lawyer and partner at Mebico and Solicitors. Before I start the session, I'd like to invite the attendees to pop any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we will set time aside later after the panel discussion to answer any questions that you might have. So if there's anything that comes to mind that while we are discussing things, please pop it in there, or you're welcome to do it later. This morning's panel discussion will be focused around a case study. Stephen, if I can start with you. As we are aware, there's many businesses and individuals that are concerned with the impact of COVID. And we are seeing right now on the high streets, our businesses are closing, companies are restructuring, redundancies are being made, and unfortunately, some of them are having to close their doors. I am in the office for a client on Aldwych, and it's really scary if I walk down Strand towards Trafalgar Square, how many businesses have actually closed shop, because I can actually see there are boards that's been put up to show that they're no longer in business. So I want to make this practical and look at a particular case study. And let's say, for example, there's a business that has 12 project controllers. The business is finding that either the clients are canceling the projects or they're putting them indefinitely on hold. And this is having an impact on the business and obviously the bottom line. They have done the due diligence and they see that they have to make 4 roles redundant. Now, to make this even more realistic, because I find I sometimes come across this when I work with my clients. So let's say, for example, with regard to these 12 project controllers they have now looked at the business case, and the business case says that they need to make 4 people redundant, or 4 roles redundant rather. They currently have an employee who's on maternity leave. They have a couple of employees who have less than 2 years of service. And then there's an employee that's also on an improvement plan. Now, I know what automatically sometimes goes through some business owners or hiring managers or line managers' thoughts. They'll think, do you know what? I've identified my 4 people. So this is quite easy. Now I've got my 4 people and these are the 8 that's going to remain. But I think we all know that this process would not be fair. So Stephen, in your case, if I came to you and I said, this is a situation that we are facing as a business, what would you advise us and tell us what to do?
Thanks, Rihanna. I think, firstly, it's important to understand what a redundancy is. I'm just going to chuck one small piece of legal jargon at you, and the definition is contained in a piece of legislation called the Employment Rights Act, specifically Section 139. So a redundancy really is where the place of work ceases to exist, or the need to provide a particular type of work ceases to exist, or there's a diminution in the requirement to undertake that specific type of work. So in layman's terms, it's a closure, as you alluded to in your trip down the Aldwych. It can be a relocation of a business. It can be a partial closure, or it could be a complete restructuring, bringing in new skills, new technology. Some restructuring can be positive, it could be expansion, but there could be job losses because the need to take on that particular type of role has changed. Now, for business in particular, what they need to guard against is being caught out by dismissing someone through a redundancy and being subject of an unfair dismissal claim, or even worse, a discrimination type claim. So always bear in mind that your goal is not to be in that situation. With staff that have got more than 2 years service, they have employment protection rights for ordinary unfair dismissal. So you mentioned that a couple of them got less than 2 years service. I would, as a matter of best practice, treat everyone the same in terms of a process. So everyone feels valued as much as they can and supported, rather than treating those with less than 2 years service differently and not maybe going through a process because you think that they don't have rights. Of course, staff with less than 2 years service can have automatic unfair dismissal rights if, for example, they've blown the whistle or they've raised health and safety complaints about COVID-19, for example. That's becoming more and more common, and a lot of employers are getting caught out simply because they think they can get away with dismissing someone or making them redundant in that situation with no comeback. That's not the case. So it's all about following a fair process, being completely transparent with that process from the outset. So I would in this situation call an immediate meeting for the team to put the business case forward, to say that, you know, this is the situation, we're going to have to lose 4 project controllers out of the team of 12. And you know, perhaps produce something in writing if that backs it up with statistics as to why we have to go down this path, and to tell the team that we're embarking on a process. So that will involve what we call a redundancy selection assessment, or a matrix, and it will involve scoring all 12 out of a list of subjective criteria. So I think from the outset, if you've got a template, it will be valuable to show the staff that template. They may be able to flag up some special qualifications that you don't know they've got, or special skills that you didn't realise. And it's a two-way traffic in terms of communicating about the process. Someone best matched to know the team's skills should do the exercise. And it's always good practice to get another senior manager to okay the results, to look over them, so it's all transparent. So I think the first meeting should be about what is happening next in terms of that redundancy matrix scoring, the timing of it, and then to confirm that those 4 with the lowest skills will be told separately that their roles are at risk of redundancy. Now, it's important to stress that they're not redundant at that point. They're only redundant at the end of any consultation period, which we'll discuss in a minute. So a lot of employers ask, how many consultation meetings should there be? The answer is, well, it's as many as you need. Some organisations will have employee representatives or trade union representatives to negotiate on behalf of staff. For this particular exercise, as there's less than 20 staff involved, we don't need to go down a statutory 30-day consultation period. But my personal view is, I think you need 30 days really to exhaust a decent process. I think you can get away with 2 weeks, but I think that's really quite short to do everything properly. So I think at least 3 consultation meetings is what I would recommend. So in terms of the scoring exercise, I think you need to list objective criteria, not subjective. What you mustn't do is target individuals because you don't like them or you think they're malingerers or any other reason why you have a distaste to them. You want to treat everyone the same and be consistent. So the things you would be looking at would be things like skills, experience. You can break that down into various components. So if it's a language issue, if they've got good language skills that are required, you can break that down as well. If it's marketing, sales, you can break it down into the different components. You can also deal with attendance, those that have sporadic, irregular attendance or going sick at the slightest thing. Don't include those on long-term sickness absence because then you're risking a disability discrimination claim potentially. And you can use flexibility. Are they team players? Do they go the extra mile to help the team to get things done? Work at weekends? So all objective stuff to score them, say, out of between 1 and 10. And then at the end of the exercise, those 4 with the lowest scores will potentially, they will be at risk of redundancy. So then the next part of the process is to individually give those scores to those unfortunate 4 that have got the lowest results, to invite discussion. Some of these employees may challenge the scores, so be consistent with appraisals if you do them. Don't mark someone down if they've got excellent. It just doesn't make sense. So you may need to review those appraisals to do the scoring. But yeah, just be honest with them as to why they didn't score so specifically in certain areas. And if they want to challenge it, let them. But at the end of the day, it's up to the employer to decide which 4 are at risk based upon their special knowledge of the skills and experience those 4 have. So after that, the consultation period will start for those 4. The other 8 are obviously saved. And then you have at least, I would say, 2 meetings, if not 3. And it's all about, really, from the employee's perspective, well, when am I being made redundant? How much am I going to get? And what's the impact going to be on me? So I think it's important for all employers to bear in mind that the aim of this exercise is to prevent the need for compulsory redundancies. What you're trying to do is to find suitable alternative employment within the workplace to avoid any redundancies at all. That's what the purpose of consultation is. It also has to be meaningful consultation, not just paying lip service. So what we would recommend is that, particularly the more larger the organisation, they should be doing more. So perhaps having vacancy lists for circulation. And consultation is a 2-way stream. The employee can suggest ideas. They might say, well, there's things that we can do perhaps to save jobs. Look, we've got a load of temps, in some of the other teams. Why don't we put a halt on temps or get rid of the temps to save permanent jobs? You could also look at maybe reducing hours. Job shares, would some of the team be happy to job share, which may obviously have a financial impact, but it would save jobs and protect an income stream. Do any of them want to go on an unpaid sabbatical for a year and see what happens after that? That's another good idea, assuming that you can travel. Obviously you can't at the moment, so that may be a tricky one, but in normal circumstances it's an option. Have a recruitment freeze, perhaps adopt flexible working practices, have a ban on overtime. If there is overtime, maybe spread that work out. So there's a variety of things you can do as an employer to minimise the impact and to try and prevent the need for redundancies. But if it's a very small business, the likelihood is that you can't magic something from the air. So once the consultation process has been completely exhausted at the end of your 30 days or your 2 or 3 weeks, or there's nothing more to say, then you'd have a final meeting with the affected employee. And you basically say, look, we've done everything we can. We've had interviews for this. We've done this, that, the other. We can't think of anything else to prevent the need to make your role redundant. Do you agree? Is there anything that you can think of? And if they say no, then, if they try and sue you for unfair dismissal, that's a good, strong bit of evidence that they've agreed that the role is redundant and that the employer's done everything they can to try and prevent it. I would also recommend that you minute or record these meetings as evidence, slap them on the file just in case there is a claim in the future. It's very useful evidence in terms of what was said and the context in which it was said. So yeah, at the final meeting, it's a dismissal meeting. There's a statutory right to be accompanied by a work colleague or a trade union representative. So there are statutory rights. There's also a statutory right to go for job interviews, to seek time off to go for such interviews or with recruitment agencies. That's a paid right, so they are entitled to pay. And at the end of the consultation meeting, that's when the trigger is pulled and the redundancy of the individual is confirmed. So it would be a good idea to have a letter, termination letter, setting out the full written reasons for the dismissal, which is a legal requirement, and providing a right of appeal against the decision, which should be made, say, within 5 working days of the decision, to another senior independent manager within the business. If it's a very small business, it may be that, you know, the individual cannot, there's not many people that are impartial within the business to appeal to. So Rihanna, that's where you come in as an independent HR expert. You can go in with fresh eyes to deal with any appeals, should there not be sufficient impartiality within a small business. So there's lots of kind of hoops to jump through and hurdles to get to the point of dismissal. It's not just a case of making someone redundant. You really have to actively do everything possible to try and prevent that, and think outside the box to see what you can do to help people save their jobs. It could be that, you know, you train them in another area, you invest in them, you know, you spend a lot of money recruiting them, they know your business inside out. Use them with that knowledge they have to deploy them elsewhere with a bit of training. And there's also a legal statutory 4-week trial period to try out that role completely. And if it doesn't work for either side, they can pull the plug even before the 4 weeks, or you can extend it, and that will then prevent the need for the redundancy should things work out and they can be retrained. So it's all about investing in your business in the long term, and not just seeing it as a, you know, an opportunity to get rid of staff. You've invested in them. If they're good staff, do your best to keep them. That would be my opinion and recommendation.
Okay, and so you mentioned about the 2 staff that had less than 2 years
Less than
service.
2 years, yes.
And we should treat them exactly the same.
Yeah. You're going through a process. Why not add them to the mix? I mean, it could be better than some of the longevity.
Yeah. Will I be correct
service.
in saying that if we look at the last in, first out, and not only use that, because if we only use that as a criteria, it could also be seen as age discrimination?
Yes, I mean,
either way, old or young.
That last in, first out cannot be a factor on its own, because, yeah, you know, you could have an age discrimination complaint. It can be one of the factors that's used. Someone with quite a longevity of service, they'll get plus points for that, but it can't be the only thing that's used. You know, I think there's the other criteria should also be adopted. But, you know, an employer might want to just get rid of someone with less than 2 years service and take them outside that pool. But I think they should get advice just in case there's any protected characteristics that those individuals have, where they could sneak in with a discrimination complaint or an automatic unfair dismissal complaint if they've raised a health and safety complaint and could argue that they've been sacked for that reason. So transparency, consistency of treatment with all employees is the best practice, I think.
Okay, and then coming to the person that's on maternity leave,
Yes.
I know you cannot discriminate against somebody just because they're on maternity leave, but am I correct in thinking that that person can be included in the pool because we're looking at the skill sets?
Yeah, if one of the one of the project controllers rather is pregnant or on maternity leave, then of course they must be included in the pool. And if they're dreadful at their job, of course you can mark them as you would normally with the others. You shouldn't treat them better or less favourably. What's interesting is that there is a lot of employers don't realise, but there is a specific protection for pregnant employees and those on maternity leave, going back to a piece of legislation called the Maternity and Parental Leave Regulations 1999. And what it says is where there is a vacancy or an alternative role, that pregnant employee or that employee on maternity leave must be given the right of first refusal to take that job or turn it down. So they do have special protections. Theresa May wanted to bring in even more protections for pregnant employees being made redundant. Unfortunately, she didn't get the opportunity. So there are white papers on exploring these rights further for pregnant employees.
Okay. And so you mentioned about giving somebody a trial period. So even if the employee pulls a plug and say this role is not for me, would they still qualify for redundancy?
Absolutely, yes. If it's within the statutory legal 4-week trial period, it may be that the role involves extra travel and the employee just can't hack the travel, or it interferes with childcare arrangements or other family issues. So if it's not working out for the employee, as long as they do so within the 4 weeks, they can pull the plug on it and say, look, it's not working out for me. Can I have my redundancy package, please?
Okay. And before I go to Kate, I've got one final question I want to ask you. We've given the person an alternative role, so it's a new position compared to what they were doing. Can we include a probationary period, even though they've been an employee with us for X number of years?
There's a couple of things you can do. If it's a brand new role and you're trying it out on a trial basis, you can extend the trial period. And if it works out, there won't be a redundancy because the job or the position or the individuals will be saved within the organisation. If there's a work in the future in that new role, then of course there could be a future redundancy scenario, but you deal with it at that point in time. Mm-hmm. For a new role, you could introduce a probationary period. I think those who've been with the business a long time may be a bit perplexed at that, but if there's no break in the continuity of employment, then it continues. So, if they don't pass that new probationary period, then, you've got to go through another process of dismissing fairly, which is another topic.
Yeah.
But yeah, my view is that it would be far better to extend the trial period if there's a possibility that it could work out, and then just to play it by ear rather than frighten the employee by having a brand new probationary period. It's what to do, but I think it's common sense dictates it's better to extend the trial period.
Yeah, Lisa, I see you raised your hand for a question. Do you mind if we take your question at the end? So if you make a note of it, then and I'm going to assume the question is for Stephen. We can get Stephen to answer your question for you. But we will definitely take all the questions at the end. Thank you. Kate, I'd like to come to you. And in terms of, as I mentioned earlier when I did my preamble when we started the session, the one thing is looking at the process and understanding that there's a fair process we need to follow for people. And I am guilty of this sometimes as well. We just focus on the process, want to ensure that it is fair, but we tend to forget about the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that there is an employee or there are employees going through this process, and this can be emotionally taxing on them. Mm-hmm. So from an HR perspective, and also from a business owner or line manager perspective, how do we emotionally support the employee? Because they're facing this whole fear of redundancy. They don't know yet whether they will be made redundant or not, but this is hanging over them. So from your perspective, how do we support them emotionally through this process? Yes, the fairness of the process is one thing that Stephen went through, but I want to look at the person behind this whole scenario.
Absolutely. And just a quick note, if I suddenly disappear, it's my internet is being unstable apparently, but I will come back. So just in case that's happened as you've been talking. But to answer your question, and this slightly refers back to what Stephen was saying about having a lot of transparency. And I think where I'm going with this is the communications that you give, not just to the people who you're consulting with and in discussions with about potential redundancy, but with the entire business. Because as soon as that word enters your business vocabulary with your employees, that fear flag is raised. It's really heightened. Whether or not people are being consulted, it will affect everybody. So I think there's two sides to this. I think it's being very open, very honest, and that wonderful word that Stephen used, transparent, with those who you are consulting, but also with your wider business, and offering the reassurance of a fair process, and the reassurance to those who are not going to be affected. And we'll come to them later, the survivors. I might touch on them later. And the reassurance of those who will be affected, how they can plan accordingly. And you might have processes in place to help them. Quite a few companies use outplacement services. They are very expensive, and there are alternatives, but you can offer them that reassurance. And I think the big thing to keep on reiterating is that it's the role that is being made redundant. It's not a personal attack. It's not because of the person necessarily. It is the role. And I think that's where people begin to really panic that they may not find future employment, because it's all down, it's all because of them, and that's not the case. So to really reiterate that, and of course, as Stephen says, follow best practice wherever possible.
Okay, no, thank you for that. And I've got another question, but before I do that, I noticed that Daniel Martis said, Kate, if your internet is unstable, stop your video and just stay on the microphone. It will help a lot. So there's a tip for you.
Lose the lovely view. Thanks, Dan.
So in terms of coming back to that emotional support, you mentioned a key word called the survivor. So, there are people that have the survivor syndrome, in that they are the ones who did not lose their jobs. And I myself went through this a few years back when I was made redundant. And then you sit there and you think, I am single. Yes, I've got responsibilities, but my responsibility is not equal to somebody who has a family, a young family that they're still supporting. And now I feel guilty that I've retained my job and yet they have to go. How do you manage employees within an environment like that? How do I get the employees who have retained their roles to understand, the guilt is not on you?
Yeah, and I think, you'll probably have your survivors go through different stages. And again, it comes down to the individual as well. So there probably will be quite a lot of guilt. There might be grief. We spend a huge amount of time, well, we used to do it at work, but definitely, with people that we work with, and lots of friendships and close relationships that have been formed. There might be grief, there might be anger towards the business as well. So I think first and foremost, and this sounds a little bit flippant, but to just be aware that your employees are going to probably go through a bit of an emotional journey, and to acknowledge that and to say, you may well be feeling this, and if you are, please come and talk to the relevant people. And that brings me on to the second point of establishing, I think what really works very well is well-being check-ins, whether that's your employees going to their line managers, going to HR, or whether you have someone like me coming in and holding a day of well-being check-ins with the company and with people who've been affected. And I think that slightly also relates to those who are going through the process as well. I think that's important. You can still offer them things during the process, like a wellbeing check-ins. If you have an employee assistance helpline, make sure that's known to everyone in the business, that they can use that. If you have mental health first aiders, make sure that they are ready and being supported, because they may well be turned to during this. And then I think it's going back to that open, honest communications about the future plans for the business. You may not know a huge amount, but to keep, the same messages coming through, keeping people informed about what's going on, what's going to happen now, 6 months, a year down the line, offering that reassurance, looking at tools to help them. So people might be taking on a huge amount of work now if people are exiting. So you might find your survivors are dealing with overwhelm, with stress, as well as grief, anger, all these other things. So making sure that they are not taking on too much, because then you're going to be facing some employees who may burn out. And again, you know, think about what you can do to support them with this. Is it worth running a well-being day, or having, again, someone like me come in and run a workshop on resilience or stress management? So I think it's about caring and helping those who are exiting as much as possible, but also remembering you've got a group of people who may not have been directly affected, such as this group, but really will carry that with them, and ensuring that you are treating them as individuals and that they may need you on different levels. So to be prepared and ready for that.
Okay. And obviously when we look at redundancy, we're talking about roles being made redundant, but eventually it has an impact on the individual. And it can have an impact on their self-esteem, because even though you've gone through the criteria and tried to be as objective as possible, people make it subjective. And I think I was not good enough for that role, and therefore I was made redundant. How do I support an employee going through that?
So I think this is where I really appeal to managers and leaders to see what can you do to help that person exit and have a brighter future. And that might be using your own network. Who can you put them in contact with? Who can help them? That might be just sitting with them and saying, when did you last look at your CV? Let's look at it together. Let me really help you create a really, you know, hot CV. Looking at their LinkedIn, can you give them a LinkedIn recommendation? So it's not just you're going to be fine. It's let's look at what, you know, we can do to get you into work, and how I as a person can help, or how I as the business can help. And then for the individual, start thinking about what you need to brush up on. Is there certain skills that, you know, now's the time to really bring them into the fore? Is it something you want to push? And this is a bit of a cliche, but this could be an opportunity. So when I was made redundant, I set up my own business. It was a tough choice and possibly not the easiest thing I've done, but it was the best choice for me. And yes, it was tough financially, and so all of the things you can imagine. Yes, it was tough, but it was the best choice. And I think this is where you can begin to help those who are being made redundant to look at it in a different way. What are the positives that can come out of this challenging time? What are the opportunities available? And I work with clients on career change all of the time. So maybe you want to bring in someone like me to go, right, do you want to continue in this industry? If so, at what level? How do we make that happen? Or do you want to have a complete change? So I think that's part of it. If it's carrying on, then let's look at the nuts and bolts, the CVs, the LinkedIn, the cover letters, interviewing techniques. You know, you might be having employees leave who haven't interviewed for a very long time. What do they need now to help them brush up on that? And also thinking about the situation that we're in, that Stephen alluded to. You know, everything's quite virtual, as we're discovering today. How can you help people with their online presence, their online technique, virtual networking, that side of things? So it is, again, thinking a little bit outside of the proverbial box to a certain extent. And then as an individual, it's, well, can I take some time to rethink my priorities? Can I take some time to consider a huge change? Or is it, do I just need to get a job? And then thinking, well, hang on a minute, maybe a stopgap job will help. If that's what I just need for the interim, just to get myself together, then thinking, what can you do? What are the skills that you haven't really touched on? Language skills. We've found in lockdown, everyone's become a first-class baker and gardener and all this sort of thing. If you are literally just trying to get the cash in, then that might be the way forward until you really can have an opportunity to think things through and get yourself together. So it's a bit of if you've got the time to really explore opportunities available to you, go for it, take it, and discuss that with those that need to know, friends and family. How can they help you? Old colleagues, how can they help you? If it's a case of, I need work now, what are your options and opportunities there, and who can help you? I think a big mistake I made when I was made redundant was I felt quite a lot of resentment. I had that personal knee-jerk reaction, and I have to say it was handled well, maybe not as well as after everything I've heard Stephen say today. But I refused the help that was offered to support my business growth, and that was a mistake. So even if you are feeling this anger, resentment, all of those things, try and get past that and see who can help you right now. And it may be people who are letting you move on. It may be people who are going through this process with you.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned there is so important, because I think also there's a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for, embarrassment as well involved in the process. And I made myself redundant from my own job. Even though the company was going through a process, I kind of pushed the hand of the administrators and kind of made my role redundant with the administration of the company. And at that stage, I knew I wanted to leave the business anyway a couple of years before, because I wanted to start my own consulting business. And this provided the opportunity, because as you said, look at what other opportunities are available. But while I was setting up the business, I was like, oh, do I go apply for job seekers allowance? And there was just the whole embarrassment that sat with me, is like telling people I'm on job seekers allowance. But I thought, why am I feeling embarrassed about it? It's money I pay towards my national insurance, first of all. But secondly, this will help me as well in terms of while I set up my business, and like you say, kind of take some of the emotional stress away. Yes, it's not a lot that we get, but at least it's a week's money, which I say pays for my grocery bills and a couple of other things at the end of the day. So a lot of the stuff is more in terms of practical stuff that we can tick down. But when you're sitting in your room alone at night, not keeping busy, you have all these other thoughts running through your mind. How do I then as an individual look after my emotional well-being?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's so tough. And again, it's down to the individual what works for you. I think that's when you can really think about, well, how much am I struggling? Because some people really will. It'll be a huge knock to their mental health, and they may suffer from very poor mental health. And that's probably when you want to go down the route of, maybe I need to consider some counselling or therapy. First and foremost, go and see your GP. If, you know, I know that at the moment people are quite nervous about going to doctor's surgeries and things like that, but look on websites such as Mind, fantastic, all about mental health, Anxiety UK. And you might want to consider one-on-one counselling and therapy. You might want to consider group therapy. You know, I've found that talking to people who have been through redundancy, actually in a very strange way, a little bit relieving and therapeutic. It was like, oh, okay, I'm kind of part of a group now. Part of this hasn't just been me going through this with all of these, you know, 3 a.m. thoughts and waking up in a cold or hot sweat. So I think that can be very helpful. I also think that it is that old adage of a problem shared is a problem halved. Talk to people who you trust and talk to people who care about you. They might have quite a lot of, you know, bias for you in a way, and that can be hard, especially if you're harboring feelings of resentment. I know that a lot of my friends were very supportive, but they were also angry on my behalf and resentful on my behalf, which is helpful in the moment, but probably not ongoing. So then you might want to consider talking to a career advisor or a career coach like myself to really begin to help with that well-being side by finding a way forward. And that's, you know, that's really important. What's the action plan? What can I do right now? And what can I do in the future for the longer term? Because that might help you break out of the cycle of thoughts.
Okay. And then just one final point from my side. I want to come back to, let's say, those 4 employees that now unfortunately have been made redundant. So you mentioned earlier on about companies sometimes will have outreach programs, and where they have companies coming in and do the outplacement and take people through a certain process. But you made the example in your case, you took it so personally and you became so stubborn, you decided, I'm not going to go through that process. If one of those 4 had exactly that same attitude, what options are open to them? and they're not taking up the
Well,
outplacement?
The offer, yes. I mean, to clarify, the company that I came from was quite small, so they didn't have that in place. But they did offer a few things. So, but if you are as stubborn as I am, I would say maybe check yourself for a start. Really review what's on offer to you. And I have to say, outplacement can be really, really helpful for some people. For others, maybe not. And for certain businesses, they just may not be able to afford it. So then you want to consider things on an individual level. You know, what will help you right now? And if you are not wanting to take help from your current employer through this process, what can you do to help yourself? And a big question I say to clients is, how are you getting in your own way at the moment? How are you stopping yourself from moving forwards? And it is a little bit of a challenge, and it's looking up in the mirror and going, yeah, my stubbornness, my anger is really stopping me from moving forward. And thinking about the longer term. This might be helping you right now, but is it going to help you in 6 months' time? If you have got people, you know, if you've got a family, if you've got dependents, how is this helping them? Probably not a huge amount. So if you are being offered help and support, please take it. If you feel that it's not for you, then maybe go in and have a chat with HR or with your line manager and say, look, what you're offering isn't really suited to me, but I have identified that I would like to work with somebody on getting some advice, or I would like to work on somebody with my interview technique, or I would like to work with somebody on my confidence, whatever it might be. So go in with suggestions, because once you start opening up that conversation, then a huge amount of doors are opened and opportunities will appear for you.
Okay, so from my side, thank you to you both for your valuable input, looking at from the process side and then from the employee side in terms of emotional well-being. We have a couple of questions that have come through, so I think let's go and answer those questions. So we have a look at in terms of what's come through. So I'm going to read the question, and then Stephen, Kate, if you can just listen in terms of whether it's applicable to you or not, and then we'll take it from there. So the first question is, how can a company declare themselves insolvent, make significant redundancies with no notice and no payments to staff, and yet still be making significant amounts of money? So Steve, I guess that's a question for you.
It certainly seems that way. The dilemma is how they can be insolvent if they're making lots of money, because an insolvency is where there's different types of insolvency, but you know, it could be that an administrator is appointed to try and salvage the business as a going concern. For example, Debenhams is a prime example of that, where you know they're still trading, much of it online, they're still making some money, but they made significant numbers of people redundant. There's the other scenario where you know the company completely goes down the pan, becomes insolvent, and has no money at all. But I think in this situation where you know the business is legally declared insolvent, even though it may be trading, the only resort open to the individuals is to claim their payments from the government redundancy service, and there's a specific form for the employer to fill in to submit to the insolvency service, the redundancy service, on the employee's behalf. Unfortunately, the employee can only receive their capped statutory payments, the statutory redundancy, which by the way is currently £538 a week based on an age, length of service type formula. They can claim, I think, up to 8 weeks notice, and I think that's capped. And there's holiday pay that they can also claim, which is also capped. So you know they're not going to get a tremendous amount, but there is, you know, if there is no money in the pot, or the employer is not in a position to pay, then obviously the aggrieved employees can get their payments from the government redundancy service. But I'm a bit intrigued to how a company can be insolvent if they're still making lots of money.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think that's the key thing that's being asked now in terms of the companies declaring themselves insolvent, yet they're still making significant amounts of money.
Yes.
Yeah, and I
There
guess
is a,
that's a separate issue, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, I don't know the background. You know, if they're making significant amounts of money, how can they be insolvent? I don't know, but I'm happy to have a longer discussion with the person that posted the question after the webinar.
Yeah, and our details will come up later. So the person that posted it, I think, is more welcome to reach out to you to have a further discussion on that. The second question is, we are a centre that is open each year from last week of January to second week of December. We have employees on fixed term contracts that start end of January, early February, and in second week of December. We had to close the centre and we used the furlough scheme. We reopened in August and have staff on flexible furlough. We were open in August from Monday to Friday during the day, but as the school have reopened, we are now operating on Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday. We were going to propose redundancies, but management wanted to take reduced working hours as an alternative to redundancies. We have 30 employees, 10 on fixed hours, but on a fixed term contract. The remaining staff are on fixed term contract on variable hours, and hours depend on the seasonal needs. How do we go about communicating this to employees?
I think the question is, what is it that you want to communicate to the employees specifically? It's not, there's a lot of information there and it's not clear specifically what's being asked. I think if there's a need to make redundancies, then you need to confirm that from the outset. So, I mean, I don't know how long the employees have been working. You say they're on fixed term contracts, which would indicate not very long. It may be that some have, you know, they finish their employment and then restart again further in the season. So there'd be breaks in their employment. They probably wouldn't be entitled to much in the way of redundancy pay anyway. And the risks are minimised in terms of unfair dismissal. But, you know, I would also always recommend best practice. But I think you need to be upfront with the staff, say what's happening. If you can afford it, you could request volunteers. Normally, you'd have to put some extra money on the table because no one's going to volunteer for redundancy because it could affect their entitlement to state benefits. We would also always recommend that any volunteers that put their hand up for redundancy, it's backed up with a settlement agreement to ensure that there's no comeback anyway against the employer. But yeah, if a lot of these staff are doing the same thing and they're working at the same time, it's again about creating a selection pool, going through it at senior management level and, you know, scoring them out of the criteria that I mentioned earlier on in terms of performance, skills, attendance, disciplinary record, that kind of thing. But yeah, even though they're fixed term and contract employees, you treat the process the same as, you know, as if they were permanent employees based on who's working in this current period of time.
Okay, and I guess also I think the question also goes around the fact that they suggested redundancies, but management wants to take reduced working hours as an alternative to redundancies.
Yeah.
So in that case, does management have to give a reason as to why they don't want to consider redundancies?
Yeah, I mean, it's not for the employee to say, I'm redundant, it's for the employer to communicate that fact. And the employer is quite right to try and prevent the need for redundancies. Obviously, they hope that the work will pick up. They want to keep these people around. So what they can negotiate is a reduction in hours to maintain the income stream. What the employer cannot do is unilaterally impose those changes because that would technically be a breach of contract. It could trigger other legal nasties, which we don't want to go into. But yeah, with any change in terms and conditions, it needs to be agreed by the employee and put in writing or updated in an updated contract of employment. But yeah, as with all things, communication is key. Some individuals may welcome a reduced working week. Others may find it a bit of a financial struggle, but everyone's situation is different. So yeah, communicate what you have in mind and see whether the employees agree.
Okay, and there's another, I got a feeling that the statement that's being made is related to the question I asked you now, because the person is saying to propose fixed term contract employees on fixed hours to work half their hours. So I guess what's being proposed is that those employees on fixed term contracts, where they've got fixed hours, is to half their working hours. Would that be a change then in employment contract which needs to be negotiated?
It depends on what's in the contract, but if they're on fixed hours for a fixed period, if you're planning to halve those hours as a proposal, then it would need to be agreed, because it depends. I mean, if some employees have sporadic hours, then it may be easy to negotiate a further reduction if it's not going to impact too much. But if they've got set hours, or they need to work so many hours to maintain an income level, then again, as I said earlier, it's best to negotiate these things with the employee, and if they agree, to set it out in writing so there's no confusion, and there's no, it's all clear in terms of evidence, so you're not going to have a dispute further down the line.
Okay, so the next question is, I have been made redundant a few years ago by a UK company with the same understanding that my role was being made redundant. However, shortly after I left the company, within a month, I was made aware from former employees that my position was replaced by another person internally, and they were fulfilling the exact same role. To me, that was obvious that I was made redundant as a person, not my role. Is that legal? And should I have taken legal action against them? I received a fair severance package on my way out, though, but it felt very personal to be replaced that way.
I think this really triggers the emotional impact which Kate was talking about earlier. So obviously we can appreciate that feeling, and it's a negative feeling to feel that you've been replaced by someone else. But in terms of the redundancy, it is the role that's made redundant. I mean, it may be that there's a cost saving issue. So if you were on a higher salary, maybe they wanted to transfer the role to someone else. But I would have to say that, if the role was there and it's being done by someone else, is it actually a redundancy situation? Because it seems that the role is still there, it's just being done by someone else. So it is the role that's redundant, and it seems that the role wasn't redundant because they've, well, in simple language, they've just got someone else to come in.
Yeah.
So yeah, possibly could have had a claim against them for unfair dismissal, unfair selection. It depends who the person is that is doing the role. It may trigger a discrimination claim. It may be that if you're a woman, a man's doing the role, or someone younger to save money. So that's an age discrimination claim where you don't need 2 years service. So yes, you could have perhaps potentially had a claim or issued proceedings to try and elicit further money out of the company. You say you received a fair severance package. That would be taken into account in the event that you were successful in an unfair dismissal claim.
Okay.
Any future income. So if you went straight away and got another job, no real financial loss, then you're not going to get much compensation even if you win.
Okay.
Expense of a legal claim. And as you probably are aware, there's 3 months to issue proceedings from the date of dismissal or redundancy. But you need to go through ACAS and attempt early conciliation. So I suspect you're probably out of time if it was a few years ago.
Okay, and then coming back to that earlier question on the fixed term contract, the person that's posted, because you asked, what is the actual question that was being asked? Is it enough to send an email to staff to communicate our plans from November that there will be reduced hours for all staff?
You can obviously communicate by email. I don't think it's the best method. It's rather impersonal. It could create negativity. I think it's far better to have an in-person meeting, or to do it if everyone's remote, to do it by Zoom or Team. I don't think email, it's quite cold. The context could be lost. The meaning could be lost in the translation of the email. I would also always recommend, rather than having a stab at it and getting it wrong, just get timely early legal advice or HR advice, because although you may spend a bit of money, you're going to save a lot in the long term. But to answer the question, yes, you can do it by email. I personally wouldn't. I might send an email to invite them to a meeting. And then, as I say, the first meeting will be to present the business case, what you're proposing, why you need to make deductions in staff, what's caused it, present any statistical evidence and information, and just be transparent about it. Don't hide behind emails. Say it as it is. You'll get more respect that way, I think, and you'll be more caring, even though you're going through that process.
Okay. The next question.
I agree with Stephen on that. If you can talk, please talk to them.
Yeah. Next question. I was made redundant after the company mandated me to take 70% of my annual leave during furlough, as it was cheaper for them to pay. I was the only person being made redundant. They told me that my work had dried up due to the difficult trading conditions. This happened beginning of June. I received a marketing email this week saying they are doing well and trading conditions were back to normal. I also have a tumor and require surgery, and said I wanted to keep my annual leave after the surgery to have a holiday. This was ignored. They said they would treat me the same as everyone else regardless of the tumor. And I also think that they wanted to get rid of me as I could be a potential cost as I would be required time off for SSP. And then there's just further information with regard to that. According to the person, she protested against them using up the annual leave, and but she was made redundant a week later. No one else was looked at. There was no selection pool for redundancy, only herself. And she's the website, or she was the website manager and editor part-time of a company. And she trained a customer service person to do the basics of the job. And now they've got the customer service person doing the basics of her role. Therefore, she doesn't think her role is really redundant. So I guess there's two aspects here in terms of the illness and then whether the role is really redundant.
Yeah. I mean, your employer can give notice that you take leave during your period of furlough. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of employers are doing that. Some are serving notice during the furlough period as well. So it's quite clear. It wasn't at the beginning of when furlough came in, but HMRC guidance makes it clear that staff can be required to take annual leave during furlough, but obviously they need to be paid at their proper rate of pay. The question is whether it's redundant, whether the role was redundant and now conditions are back to normal trading, and whether they used your illness as a reason for getting rid of you. It doesn't say how long you've been there, but you potentially would or did or could have a claim. You say this happened at the beginning of June, so my concern is the limitation period. So if you're serious about having a go at your former employer and taking it, let's say, to an employment tribunal, then you've only got 3 months from the date you were made redundant. I think you said it was the beginning of June, so potentially you may be out of time or on the cusp. And as I said before, you need to go through ACAS. So if you're within that 3 months, I would recommend that you issue an ACAS early conciliation application immediately, because that will stop the clock on the 3 months and buy you up to another 1 or 2 months to get your act together and get the employment tribunal issued. And these things are good because it could be a mechanism to pressurize your former employer into settling, particularly if they realise that there is a risk that they could lose a disability discrimination complaint combined with an unfair dismissal, and the adverse bad publicity that could promote in the media and in the wider business community.
Okay, so I'm going to ask this person to contact you separately, because it sounds like you can advise on certain aspects.
Yeah, my concern is when the redundancy happened, because as I say, it seems very close to the 3 months.
So final notice was given on the 6th of July.
So we're within time. So there is.
So yeah, if you'd like to, Steve's details will come up later. If you want to contact Steve and just go through it in more detail with Steve, he can advise you accordingly. One final question, because I've also got, I'm conscious of the fact that we're coming up for 12 o'clock. So if you can just bear with us for another 5 minutes, that would be great. And we can just answer this final question.
Okay.
Can the employer reduce your salary without changing your employment contract? And what are your rights given the potential threat of losing your job?
Well, Kevin, the answer to that question is no, they can't unilaterally reduce your salary without your agreement, because by doing that, they'd be breaching your employment contract. And if you've got 2 years under your belt, you could claim something called constructive dismissal. The only way your employer can reduce your salary is if you actually agree. And it could be that they say, well, unless you agree, we're going to have to, we need to cut costs. Unless you agree, we're going to have to make the role redundant because we can't afford to pay you at this level. So you either agree to a reduction to help the business, or we reduce your hours if that's a possibility. And it goes back to what I said earlier, that you have to think, the employer needs to think outside the box and try and protect jobs. And if that's the only way plausible, it does seem that the employer is holding a gun to the employee's head. But if faced with that scenario, it might be better to accept maybe a temporary reduction, to negotiate, to say, well, I'll agree it for the, say, 3 months, and if things pick up, then it goes back to what I'm on now. So that's a possibility, to negotiate with that employer. But if it's likely that you either lose your job unless you agree to the reduction, then you may have to make a commercial decision. And not many individuals have much. They don't have many options available in terms of future work at the moment, because everything's up in the air. So it's all about protecting your income, and if it means taking a bit of a hit to get some money coming in, that's probably better. And then you can see what's out there in terms of other roles, maybe use the services of Kate to help with a career change, for example.
Okay, thank you. So those are all
the...
Oh, sorry, Kate, go on.
Oh, sorry,
Kate,
just to
on.
add very quickly thanks,
Yeah.
to those who are going through quite poor experiences, and really feel for you, for everyone who's posted comments. I think a big question is, do I really want to remain with a company that treats me so badly and harbour that resentment? And yes, Stephen, you're absolutely right that the money side is definite. But for organisations who are maybe just wanting to do this quickly, swiftly, and not very well, think about the long term. We will come through this pandemic and this situation, and then you are going to want to have your loyal employees backing you to the hilt. If you mistreat people now, people will remember it, unfortunately. If you treat them well now, they will look at you in good favour. So I think that's a big takeaway for people who are going through this, and for organisations who are having to do this. Follow best practice, because it will be remembered.
Yeah, that's true. And I think as an employer, what do you want to be remembered for, I guess, ultimately?
Exactly.
About your reputation,
exactly.
at the end of the day.
Yeah. So to both of you, thank you so much for taking part in this panel discussion.
Thank you for inviting us.
Before we end the session,
thank you.
If our attendees can just bear with us for another couple of minutes, I'd like to give both of you just an opportunity just to give very brief what services you offer and how people can contact you.
Okay, I'm Steve.
Well, as I
Sorry,
start,
you go, Kate.
I'll just share the screen. I'll just share the screen with our contact details. So I hope everyone can see that. And go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Stephen Eckett. I'm Head of Employment at Meeby & Co. We're a full-service law firm with offices in Soho, Camberwell, Dorking in Surrey, Chigwell and Loughton in Essex. We also provide property services, conveyancing, commercial property, leases, family law, also litigation, and private client, things like wills and probate, and powers of attorney, that kind of thing. So if you need our services, get in touch and we'll see how we can assist.
Kate, yourself?
Great, and thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me and including me in this. As I mentioned before, I wish I had both of you with me a few years ago when I went through my redundancy. But in terms of what I do, my name's Kate. I'm from Kate Bishop Coaching. I work with individuals on career change, so quite a lot of career reinvention post-redundancy, and also career progression, so people wanting to leap up that career ladder. And I work with businesses and organisations on workplace well-being, so helping people through this very tricky time at the moment with stress, resilience, that side of things. I believe that Mondays should feel just as good as Fridays, even if they're not a bank holiday, and that's really key. If you're not enjoying what you do, then I'm here to help you do that and make a change. Thank you.
From my side, probably just a wrap up with in terms of what I do. So I offer HR consulting services to those businesses where they don't need a full-time HR person on site. But I also parachute into organizations where they do have HR teams, and I assist them with certain projects. I am finding though that I am having a number of people who are going through redundancies or being made redundant, asking me, can you just have a look at my CV? Could you assist with me putting my CV together, or even just taking them through a mock interview? So I am offering those services as well. Again, my details is also on the screen. So any of you that just wants to have a chat, please feel free to contact me. And then to reiterate what my two panelists have said, thank you so much for tuning in this morning and having the discussion with us. We do have our details on the screen in front of you. So contact us at any time. If you have any further questions or would like to discuss anything in further detail, especially those of you who want to post your questions and feel you want to have a further discussion regarding that. So that's all from us for now. And once again, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day. And that's bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Kate, I can put you in contact with Mark. I just saw the email, the message come up. Okay, so bye.
Great, thank you. Bye everyone, thank you.